If you want to know something about yourself, sit on your bed one night and say, what's one thing I'm doing wrong, that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix? You meditate on that, you'll get an answer, and it won't be one you want. If you're trying to get your life together and your friends get in the way, that's actually real useful for you because you've now identified who your friends aren't. And you might think, well, I can't give them up. It's like, oh, yes, you can. And not only can you should, and it would be better for them. Because if they're aiming down and they want you going down with them, there's nothing good about what's happening to them, and there's certainly nothing good about that for you.
Yeah, they're not going to, and then they're going to learn, wow, if I'm going to lose friends if I continue in these directions. Yeah.
Exactly. It's literally this. The more you are focused on yourself, the more miserable you are. It's as simple as that.
But that's society now these days. We're very...
I know. Well, and we're and there are terrible forces pushing us in that direction, you know. Like I could attribute this to the idiocies of a degenerate Protestant liberalism driven by postmodernism. But you could also just as easily point to consumerist capitalism. It's like, it's all about you. It's all about what you want. Worse, it's all about what you want right now. Worse, it's all about what your basest appetites want regardless of cost right now. Well, that's the same as being 2 years old. And I think there's been a lot of really radical changes in our society in the last 50 years, and we don't understand their consequences. The most radical change is probably the birth control pill, because it's provided women with voluntary control over the reproductive function, and that's equivalent to a major biological mutation, right? Its consequence is virtually incomprehensible. I mean, partly one of the consequences is you know, where reliable birth control is provided to women, first of all, they immediately become educated. Second, their economies tend to grow. And third, the birth rate falls below replacement. And so, isn't it so cool, is that you don't even have to be that funny, in some sense, to be a comedian. You have to be a little bit funny, and then you really have to listen. And so if you go out to your audience and you tell them jokes and they tell you what's funny, then you can collect all the things that everyone thinks is funny, and then you can go on a world tour and just say things that everyone thinks are funny.
Exactly.
It's so cool. That's the pathway to that.
Hence, aggregate.
Exactly. So and the comedians are doing what a political leader who is functioning properly does. They're doing exactly the same thing. And so your partner has to be all in. That's why you have a marriage vow. Because the marriage vow is basically this. This is the vow. No matter what you tell me, I won't run away. And that's a bitch of a vow, man. Because when someone unveils their whole heart, they unveil themselves all the way down to hell. It's not pleasant. It's awful. And so they need to know that you will not run away. And that's a vow, because what do you know? And the problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, well, first of all, that's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month and depressed and aimless and goalless. You want a horizon of ever-expanding possibility. That's where everyone learns everything. When you're doing dangerous things carefully, man, that's where you learn. And so you interfere with that. You interfere with the process by which your children expand their competence. And it takes courage not to interfere with that. When you see your 3-year-old daughter climbing up the monkey bars, our daughter used to do that in our backyard, you know, and she was 3 and the monkey bars were about 8 feet high. She liked to go right to the top and climb across them. It's like we're watching out the back window thinking, but what do? We want to run out there. Be careful.
Yeah.
Right, which is the thing. There's a bit of malevolence in that. Oh, my daughter's worrying me. Well, I'll go out there and take care of her, but I'll startle her. Then she'll fall. Well, that'll fix her. She won't do that again. She won't make me nervous. It's like, you got to watch those things, man.
Right. It's not about them. It's about you.
You want a goal that you can never attain, right? So you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move towards it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. You come home at the end of a workday. Okay. There's a right way of doing that you have to negotiate with your wife. You know, maybe she rushes to the door and meets you with all the problems of the day. Okay, that's probably not a great strategy. You know, because You're already up to here, you're tired. So is she, likely, from whatever she was doing. You're probably hungry. Well, you don't want to talk to someone. This is another great rule. Don't talk to your partner about something complicated when they're hungry. So maybe you come home, you have something to eat, you kick off your shoes, maybe you take 10 minutes for yourself, and then you can talk. But you want to get that right. I don't like conflict. Like, I'll do almost anything to, not to paper it over, though. That's the thing, to fix it. But the reason that I'll engage in conflict is because I know, it isn't a theory, I know that conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. And so if I do have a problem with someone, I want to note it, get it on the table, fight it through to the bloody bottom, fix it, and move on. And there's a, that's a lot of emotional stress and complex reconceptualization and retooling. And people would rather avoid that, because, you come home from work and your mind is on something, whatever the hell it is. And then this like snake pops up and you think, do we really have to deal with this now? It's like, well, maybe. You need an antidote to suffering, and it has to be deep. And deep moves you tectonically, and it's not a trivial thing. But that's better than happiness. And maybe if you're lucky while you're pursuing that and while you're immersed in it, you get to be happy, and you should fall on your knees and be grateful for that when it happens. It's a gift. It really is a gift. And it comes upon you unexpectedly, your happiness, But you aim to climb uphill to the highest peak you can possibly envision. And that's better than happiness. But you have to, it's tricky when you're trying to establish something new, because look at a company like Uber, they had to bend the rules to be successful. And those companies that have rented those scooters out and put them on the streets everywhere, they just kind of went ahead and did it. It's not something an orderly person would do, because they'd ask for permission, whereas the people who started these scooter rental companies just said, well, what'll happen if we put them everywhere? And the answer was, that seemed to work. But, you have to have a rule-breaking proclivity in order to manage that. But the thing is, if you're an entrepreneur, you need conservative people, because once you've figured out how to do something, and then you want to run it algorithmically, you want to run it by the rules, well, then it's the conservative types that are going to be really good at doing that and making sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and show up for work on time and have stable marriages and be reliable. Agoraphobics are often afraid of elevators, and that's quite convenient because, there are elevators everywhere, so you can start having them confront their fear of elevators. So how do you do that? Well, if they're really terrified, you say, well, let's look, why don't you come sit by me and let's look at some pictures of some elevators. And you say, look at the elevator. Okay, now imagine being 20 feet from it. How are you feeling? And they'll tell you. They're nervous, they're afraid they're going to get trapped in the elevator. They're afraid they'll have a heart attack. They're afraid that they'll be in there with other people who are watching them panic and have a heart attack and being humiliated. So the two big categories of fears for people are like painful death and then public humiliation. There's no secure path forward. Give it up. It's risk everywhere. You think, oh my God, that's terrible. It's like, yes, except for two things. You can pick your risk. That's the first thing. So you get to pick your poison. That's something. And second, you're a lot tougher than you think. So even though there's risk everywhere, if you confront it forthrightly, what you'll find is that you can actually handle the risk. And that's the security. 19, if you go back 100 years ago, imagine what the last 5 years would have been like, right? The entire world was encapsulated in a terrible war. The trench warfare was absolutely brutal, and that was a 5-year period. And then that was followed by the Spanish influenza, which killed 120 million people. And, so I'd rather be here now than there then by a substantial margin. And I think life is never easy, even under relatively positive conditions. But I would say that it's very difficult to make the case that we're not in good times. You think you're right if you do something and it works. And that doesn't mean you're 100% right, and it doesn't mean it's going to work forever, but because you're ignorant and because your knowledge is limited, that's kind of what you've got. And so that's one form of truth. And then another form is well, can we agree in a negotiated manner? Like, we kind of hope that if we're trying to solve a problem, that we can talk until we come up with the least bad. Oh, here's a bunch of things universities do. They confer an identity upon you. Who are you? I'm a student. Okay, respectable. So for $120,000, let's say, it's more than that sometimes and less than that, you now have an identity for 4 years that your culture respects.
Okay.
And that means you have a container within which you can have intellectual freedom while you're deciding what you want to do with the rest of your life. Instead of torturing yourself about how useless you are because you don't have a productive job yet. So that's a big deal. God only knows what that's worth, but not nothing. You know, you'll be romantically interested in each other and you want to spend some time together, but there's a bunch of problems brewing, and your wife will definitely do, this will absolutely happen, is that when you're trying to be interested in each other, these things will come into her mind and distract her, and she'll bring them up. And then you'll get pissed off because it's like, well, we're supposed to be having fun at the moment. We're supposed to be attending to each other. Why are you bringing that up? And the answer is, well, we're together and these are problems. We haven't set aside time to deal with them. The reason you should listen to your wife is because if you listen to her enough, she'll tell you what's wrong and what she wants. And then you can fix what's wrong and you can give her what she wants. So, like, there's no way these legacy apparatuses can compete. How can they? Printing with universal distribution is free. Video with universal distribution is free. How can a network possibly compete? It can't. So spiral death. And as they die, they lose their editors, they lose their fact checkers, they lose their good journalists, they lose everybody with courage. And then they put out pablum and they're tempted by clickbait because that's what you have to do while you're dying. It's like, Christ, we have to attract attention somehow. So you say, well, Joe Rogan apologized, and everybody clicks on it and they read it and they think that's a lie. And so you've lost another 5% of your viewership. Especially with someone like Rogan, the probability at this time that if Rogan doesn't understand the gist of the conversation that 95% of his audience doesn't understand it's like 100%. The importance of listening can't possibly be overstated. Listen, ask questions until you understand. And by doing that, you also help the other person clarify the situation.
So let me ask you this. Do you think media makes us smarter or stupider?
I think it makes some people smarter and some people stupider. I mean, well, look at television. See, you got to kind of fragment. You got to kind of fragment the people that you're talking about into different groups. You know, it's like asking whether daycare is good for kids or not. And the answer is, if the daycare is better than your family, then daycare is good for you. So you imagine, you know, maybe there's 100 problems that beset the world, from starvation to lack of water, to lack of sanitary facilities, to lack of education, to tyrannical governance, to, well, you can continue the list in your own imagination. What Lomborg did was consult very high-level economists who he put in teams to find out where you get the biggest return for your foreign policy dollar over a reasonable stretch of time, and it's clearly the case that if you invest in early childhood nutrition, that pays off at about 250 to 1. And so one of the ways that you can impair children's intelligence permanently is by ensuring that they don't have enough to eat when they're very young. And that's actually something that can be addressed very inexpensively, and it's to everyone's benefit. If you don't have that, you have the aimlessness and the suffering and the pointlessness and your own malevolence and bitterness. It's hell.
Yeah.
And then you make hell for you, and you make hell for your family, and you make hell for the community. It's like none of that's good. And so whenever I see people step away from that and they're moving forward and they're telling me about it, I think, and I really think, great, that's a miracle, man. Keep it up. Like, it's really important. And I don't care what you're doing. You know, and I have lots of respect for working class guys. I mean, I came from a little town. I've had all sorts of working class jobs. A tremendous amount of what determines whether or not a child is successful at school is their intelligence. I mean, you people all went to high school, to junior high school. I mean, you know that in a group of 30 kids, there's some kids that are so bright that they figure everything out in the first 15 seconds, and there are other kids who just can't get it no matter how hard they try. And that's one of the really catastrophic and built-in inequalities in the world. Everyone has this proclivity to some degree, as they're deeply self-conscious and uncertain. And so instead of allowing the person they're with to connect with that underlying uncertainty and inadequacy, they act out a persona.
Yeah.
And then the problem is that, well, perhaps the person falls in love with that persona, but there's no real connection there. It's an artifice. But the reason for that is because I tried to explain to people, to everyone, including me, why it's important to clean up your room. It's like, hey, man, you have a room.
Yeah.
It's like most people throughout human history have not had a room. You have a room. Well, my room's a hellhole. It's like, well, then you're a denizen of hell inhabiting it. You should do something about that. Well, what? Well, put it in minimal order. Get your clothes together, because you have to wear those, and that's how people are looking at your clothes. So get your clothes in order. What clothes should you be wearing? Not the clothes of a total wretched loser. How about that? You know,
Tasmanian devils and stuff like that.
Well, right, exactly. Well, and what about your bed? Well, is it comfortable? Do you make it in the morning so it looks like half civilized? Can you sleep there? And if you ask like you want the answer, you'll get the answer, and it won't be an answer you like, and it won't be something you like to admit. You might think, well, it's only 5% my fault still. It's like, yeah, okay, but at least it's 5%. Then you can go back to your wife and you can say, here's the stupid thing I've done to contribute to this, and I figured it out, and I'll try not to do it again, and, you know, sorry I'm so dumb.
Yeah.
And maybe if she's done the same thing, she can tell you the same thing, and then maybe now you're both like humbled a bit in the proper way. You can actually have a discussion that's aimed at solving the problem instead of attaining victory.
Yeah. Why do we have to be right? Like I don't have to be, I hope to not have to be right a lot of times. I'm happy to be wrong.
But I can't think of a time in the past that I would trade for now, despite all the problems that are also part and parcel of being alive now.
So do you think these good times will produce weak men, or you don't buy that? You think in any times we're going to have weak, strong people being produced?
Well, I think there is a certain danger in luxury. You know, we don't know how necessary a certain degree of privation is to motivation. You know, the typical first generation immigrant story is someone arrives with nothing and is motivated fully to do whatever is necessary to make either themselves or their children a success. And that does seem to decline. So you rank order value. Well, what's the ultimate value? That's the religious question. Is there an ultimate value? But you can successively approximate it.
Yeah.
You know, and you say, well, what are the markers for it? Love is one. Beauty is one. Truth is one. Nobility of character, that's another. Those things are real. And they're more real than their antagonists.
Yes.
You know, so I think good is more powerful than evil. And I say that lightly, man. I've studied evil for like 30 years.
Yeah, man, you're like you've been in the dark arts, man.
Yeah, well, that in the clinical practice, you know. So I've looked at the darkest things I could find, and some of them I barely recovered from.
And you still believe that good
I believe more. I believe more than I did before. I believe that our capacity to transcend evil is far more powerful than evil, even though evil is no bloody joke. Your home is also a small business, and it has to be run like that. And you have to spend 90 minutes, at least 90 minutes a week with your wife, just running the damn business. And I can tell you, if you don't do that, you'll never get to the play, ever. Because maybe you'll be romantically interested in each other, and you want to spend some time together, but there's a bunch of problems brewing. You know, when I was a teenager, I mean, I did, God, if I had to write a book about the stupid things I did when I was a teenager, it'd be a very thick book. And it'd be a worse book if there were photographs accompanying it. And, you know, but I had this advantage that young people today don't have, which was, well, when my day of stupidity was over, I could go home and it was not there. You know, like it wasn't on Twitter, it wasn't on Facebook. There wasn't 20 of my friends communicating to me about, you know, what foolish thing I did at the party the night before. And young people now, they're just followed by paparazzi, essentially, constantly. There was a time, a very long time, where my daughter was insanely ill and suffering brutally and deteriorating at the same time. And that's overwhelming by definition, because a problem you can't solve is overwhelming. And then so the question arises, well, how do you deal with a problem that's overwhelming that you can't solve without making it worse? So one of the things that Tammy and I did was we made rules. It's like we didn't talk about Michaela after 8 o'clock at night. It was just off the table, because we knew, well, are you going to Are you going to go to sleep? Are you going to need some sleep tonight? Like, if we're going to battle this for like decades, we better not wear ourselves out. Okay, how not to? Well, let's make some rules. They're like negotiating rules. One of the most effective things you can do to help people is to listen. And there are technologies of listening. And so the first one is, don't assume that either you or the person who's talking knows what the problem is. Once you have the problem specified, you've solved like 95% of the problem. It's that diagnostic move is really hard. And then you can start negotiating problem solution. And but you can develop the patience to do that once you understand that that initial act of listening is in itself the most helpful thing you can do.
I feel like are the moments that build, especially young men, and live inside of them forever.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I find quite painful is all these people that I'm encountering, and I think it's more true for young men, because I think young women are getting more encouragement from society, all things considered, and maybe not, maybe that's not right, but it doesn't matter. It's still the case that lots of young men come and talk to me, and it's obvious that no one has ever encouraged them.
Yeah.
And I mean encouraged technically. No one has attempted to instill courage into them. That's the protester type, you know. I'm only my sexuality. I'm only my appetite. That's the consumer model. But all that has to be integrated. And then you might say, well, integrated into what? Well, integrated into a structure that serves all of those spirits simultaneously and harmoniously across a long time. That's maturity. Okay, but that doesn't happen in isolation. So then there's stages above that. Okay, so the next thing is, maybe you've got your act together enough so that someone can tolerate being around you. So there's enough left over from you so you can play with someone else. So you establish a relationship, marriage, let's say. You invite someone else to join forces with you. You produce a united vision. Disabuse yourself of the notion that you know what is best for this person. Not only do you not know, you actually don't want that responsibility for two reasons. Let's say they do what you say and something good happens to them. Well, whose victory is that? Yours or theirs? And if it's yours, did you just steal it? And then let's say they fail following your advice. Well, they pay the price for that. And you can skip away merrily and say, well, I should have spoke more carefully. Every day I have is so interesting that it's almost unbearable. And I would tell people who are listening, you know, you might want that for yourself, let's say. You might want to have that. And I can tell you, one way to increase the probability that things will unfold for you properly is to not lie. Just stop lying. Period. Stop saying things you believe to be untrue. Stop doing things you know to be wrong. Just start with that. You'll get closer and closer to the truth. And the truth is the adventure of life. Our organizations are way too large and complex for anything like direct democracy to work. We're going to have a vote on every issue? Like, obviously not. Mm-hmm. People just don't have the expertise for that. And it's not like they shouldn't be consulted. They absolutely should be. The voice of the people is the sovereign master of the political enterprise. But what a leader does is aggregate that voice. Yeah.
And I'm suddenly in control of my life, and my feelings and my negative thoughts aren't in control anymore.
Take the best next step that you can manage to take.
Yeah.
That's a great rule, man, and that's the right path, eh? And the question, well, if you're
because it's forward,
forward,
it's a forward path.
Towards something worthwhile. That's where you want to be. You want to be moving forward towards something worthwhile. You don't even necessarily want to be where it's worthwhile, although that would be all right. And maybe now and then you get there, and then you're happy. But mostly, what you want to be is moving forward to something worthwhile, which also indicates why you need to specify something worthwhile. Think, well, what's worthwhile? That's up to you. What will get you out of bed in the morning in a miserable day? What would be worthwhile? Well, a trauma is a hole that hasn't been filled in. And so maybe if you had a trauma when you were 4, you hit a wall and you couldn't resolve the trauma, that's no different than not maturing in relationship to that problem. Now, then you might encounter a situation where that's reminiscent of that. So, for example, someone might say, I had a problem with my boss. I have a recurring problem with my boss. And so you listen, he says, that reminds me exactly of what my father did when I, in this situation when I was a kid. And so the reason the person is reacting to their boss in a negative way is because they're using the same conceptual structure that they used to construe their father when they were 4. You'll see this in marriages all the time. Like,
does that not raise the question about the decline of religion?
Absolutely. Well, that's the next level. It's like, okay, so there's you, now you're a husband, right? And so your identity is those two things in lockstep. But that's not enough. Now maybe you're a father. Now you have kids. Now you have a whole nother level of responsibility and opportunity to flesh yourself out and support and love, right? So now, and then, well, you've got your family together. That's not enough. You've got the community to serve. So you want to serve the community, and then communities scale. Maybe you're good in your local business and you have a local business organization and you're good in that. And then, then there's the town level and the city level and the state level and the country level. And then, America is one nation under God. That's the ultimate level of this hierarchy of identity. And that's what should be served most fundamentally. That's a definition. Okay. And so if you start to make your room beautiful, then everything around that isn't like that just starts to glow, in the worst sense.
So is that dangerous then, to beautify things?
It's terribly dangerous. That's why people are afraid of beauty, but it's the greatest thing you can do. Because it puts you in alignment with, beautiful things are beautiful for a reason.
Right.
That beauty has depth, it's real depth, man. That's what gets you in touch with the transcendent and the divine is beauty. You introduce that into your room, you're playing with fire, and people will resist it. And so you can think, well, first of all, I'll make my room Spartan and clean and neat, sort of like military level discipline, like clean. It's like, okay, now you got it cleaned up. And then you think, my clothes are in order, I got it cleaned up. Now maybe I'll do something that'll make it beautiful. Mm-hmm. Well, then you have to learn what beauty is too, and that's really hard. I learned that also from Carl Jung. He derived a dictum from alchemy. Instir quel invenitur, which means that which you most need to find will be found where you least want to look. Right. But what's so interesting, and this I didn't expect this, is that if you peer into the darkest dark, you find the brightest light. And I never expected that, but that's what happened. I thought, oh, this is horrible even beyond what I could comprehend. But the light that can overcome that exists. The light that can overcome that exists. It's actually real. The medieval definition of God was something like the sum of all that is good, or the essence of what is good. Now, you can debate forever about what that is, but it is something you live in relationship to. And you might say, well, I don't believe in God. And then I would say, well, do you believe in good? And you'll say, no. I say, well, then you can't act, because you act towards a good, or you're not motivated. It's literally this. The more you are focused on yourself, the more miserable you are. Why is there something wrong with being an actor? Well, the first question is, well, who sets your role? And then the second question is, who's pulling your strings? So you've put on this front that is there to make you popular and sexy and desirable and to mask from yourself your own inadequacies. But that's a role. Well, who wrote it? And for what purpose? And so Jung said, for example, that we all acted out a myth, and whether we knew it or not. And, maybe you're acting out a tragedy. Maybe